A full 10 years before the world just tore itself apart in the Great War, another conflict erupted way out in the Far East. And this war, it was basically a full dress rehearsal for the slaughter that was coming. This is the story of the Russo-Japanese War, a conflict that gave a terrifyingly accurate prediction of modern warfare, and, maybe more importantly, why the so-called great powers of the world chose to look the other way. So, picture it. It's the turn of the century. The massive Russian Empire is clashing with a recently modernized Japan over who gets to control Manchuria and Korea. Now, to all the Western observers who were flocking to the region, the outcome seemed like a total no-brainer. This was David versus Goliath, right? And absolutely nobody was putting their money on David. And, this quote from the famous author Jack London, who was actually there reporting on the war, it just perfectly sums up the condescending, racially biased view the West had. They didn't see Japanese soldiers as professionals with better tactics. No, they saw them as this fanatical, almost subhuman force. And that assumption, it would have deadly consequences. Because the world was completely and totally wrong. Japan didn't just win, it absolutely dominated. It laid bare the future of war, from the hell of the trenches to the clash of steel on the high seas. And the failure of the world's best military minds to understand why Japan won would lead them to make the exact same catastrophic mistakes in 1914. So what did they see? What were these huge lessons they missed? First, let's take a look at the land war, because this gave the world its first real look at the brutal, grinding, attritional combat that would become the hallmark of the Western Front. At the Siege of Port Arthur, Japanese forces were just hurling themselves in these massive human wave assaults against fortified Russian positions that were bristling with machine guns and artillery. Observers like Jack London were just horrified. This wasn't some heroic cavalry charge from the old days. This was industrial-scale slaughter. In the end, Japan did take Port Arthur, but look at the cost, over 58,000 casualties. I mean, a number like that was it was unheard of at the time. It was a grim preview of the casualty lists we'd later see from battles like the Somme and Verdun. And this right here, this is basically the tactical blueprint for World War I, laid out for everyone to see. You've got vast trench networks, the absolute dominance of the machine gun, massive artillery barrages, even digging tunnels under enemy forts to blow them up. It was all there. The playbook for the Western Front was literally written in Manchuria in 1905. A young Douglas MacArthur, who was touring the battlefields right after the war, he saw it with his own eyes. He got it. He understood that warfare had fundamentally changed. It wasn't about courage and spirit anymore. It was about machinery, logistics, and being smart. All right, so that's the land. Now let's head out to sea, where the naval war was every bit as revolutionary. This was the first major clash of modern steel battleship fleets, and man, it would change naval strategy forever. So the stage is set for this huge, decisive showdown, the Battle of Tsushima. And it's a real tale of two fleets. On one side, you've got the Japanese. Their morale is sky high, they're incredibly well trained, and they're defending their home turf. On the other side, the Russian Baltic Fleet. These guys had just sailed a grueling 18,000 miles around the world, they were exhausted, their ships were a mess, and their morale was in the gutter. So the Japanese admiral, Togo, he executes this classic, absolutely brilliant naval maneuver. It's called crossing the T. Basically, he steamed his fleet right across the front of the Russian line, making the shape of a capital T. Now, what this did was allow all of his ships to fire all of their main guns, a full broadside. Meanwhile, the poor Russian ships, stuck in the vertical part of the T, could only shoot back with the few guns they had facing forward. It was a tactical masterpiece. And the result? I mean, just look at this. It was one of the most lopsided naval victories in all of history. The Russians lost 21 major warships, either sunk or captured. The Japanese, they lost 3 small torpedo boats. The entire Russian Baltic fleet was just annihilated. The lessons from Tsushima were crystal clear. It proved that future battles will be won from long range by ships with the biggest guns. It showed that wireless radio was a revolutionary tool for commanding a fleet. And it proved that a well-trained, motivated crew was every bit as important as the ship itself. This single battle directly kicked off a global naval arms race, leading to ships like Britain's famous HMS Dreadnought, and massively ratcheting up the tensions that would finally explode in 1914. Okay, so with all of these clear, bloody lessons from both land and sea, you just have to ask, Why didn't anyone listen? Why on earth did European generals march their armies into the exact same meat grinder just a decade later? Well, the biggest reason, and it's an ugly one, was this deep-seated racial bias. Instead of crediting the Japanese with having superior tactics, better technology, and phenomenal training, many Western observers just dismissed their success as a product of Asiatic fanaticism, this idea that they had a willingness to die that civilized Europeans supposedly didn't. And that kind of thinking, it led to a fatal miscalculation. They decided that the brutal trench warfare at Port Arthur was just an anomaly, something unique to this specific conflict between these specific people. They truly believed it just wouldn't apply to a future war between so-called civilized European powers.
And that led directly to the terrible price of their ignorance. The prophecy of 1905 was about to be fulfilled in blood across the fields of France and Belgium. Now, to be fair, some lessons were partially learned. Armies did start focusing more on marksmanship, and they started adding more machine guns. But as you can see here, the most crucial lessons were completely ignored. They didn't develop things like trench mortars or hand grenades. They didn't grasp how vital it was to coordinate infantry and artillery. And the most fatal mistake of all, they clung to this outdated belief that a strong offensive spirit could somehow overcome machine guns and barbed wire.
This failure to really understand what the Russo-Japanese War was screaming at them meant that all of those painful lessons had to be learned all over again. Only this time, they were relearned in blood, on a scale that just dwarfed Manchuria, with millions of lives lost in just the first few months of World War I. It really just leaves us with this one haunting question. The future of warfare was put on full display for the entire world to see in 1905. It was a clear warning, a prophecy written in fire and steel. What if they had listened? How might the entire course of the 20th century have changed?